Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment, because in this world of shadows, every click pulls you deeper into the truth. The rain poured over the Nevada desert like a dark curtain, blurring the road where the convoy screeched forward. Red and blue lights carved through the storm as federal agents pressed in on a black SUV barreling down the highway. Inside it sat the man who had eluded capture for decades, the ghost of the Sinaloa underworld, the myth whispered in courtrooms and intelligence briefings. Ismael, Mayo Zambada. The vehicle fishtailed as tires blew. Within seconds, the chase ended in a violent hiss of steam and metal. Agents surrounded the SUV, weapons low but ready. The door opened slowly. A weary, aging man stepped into the floodlights, his hands raised, his eyes carrying 50 years of secrets. No shootout. No explosive last stand. Just a quiet surrender. For investigators who had chased him across borders, jungles, safe houses, and coded satellite calls, it felt unreal, as if a legend had simply walked out of a story and into their custody. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because buried behind Mayo's quiet surrender was a truth no one expected, a truth sealed inside a case file that agents didn't dare open until the night his guilty plea shook the Western world. 3 days earlier, the body was found in an abandoned trucking depot outside Phoenix, lying face down in a pool of cold rain and oil. No ID, no wallet, just a folded note stuffed into the victim's jacket, a note containing a single name, MZ. Detective Claire Hart with the DEA stared at it under the dim yellow hazard lights. The victim had no fingerprints, burned off clean, and no signs of robbery. Whoever killed him wanted the message to be loud, but the method to be silent. As investigators combed the scene, a flash drive was recovered from the victim's boot heel. When decrypted hours later, it revealed a network diagram showing illegal trafficking routes stretching from Mexico to Europe, routes the DEA had never seen documented before. But there was something even more disturbing. At the center of the diagram was a symbol often whispered in intelligence briefings but never openly acknowledged, a small, stylized mountain. And behind it, typed in red, Mayo, internal breach imminent. Hart leaned back, feeling the weight of something she couldn't yet articulate. The body wasn't random. It wasn't routine cartel violence. This was an internal crack, maybe a betrayal, maybe a warning, aimed directly at one of the most elusive figures in organized crime history. But that wasn't the only lead. Hours later, a second anonymous tip arrived, a grainy CCTV still showing a man entering a storage unit just across the border in Nogales. The timestamp matched the approximate time the victim disappeared. When agents arrived at the unit, they found it empty except for a single item on the concrete floor. A metallic case with Mayo's initials etched inside the lid. Inside the case lay a burner phone, smashed deliberately, except for one intact memory chip. The data recovered from that chip changed everything. Behind layers of encryption lay hours of recorded conversations, all referencing a secret faction within the cartel, arguing over whether Mayo's era was ending and who would inherit the power vacuum. A quiet war was unfolding, one the authorities were only beginning to understand. Back in Las Vegas that same week, undercover federal monitors intercepted encrypted radio chatter coming from a heavily guarded safe house. Phrases like "the old man is slipping," "internal betrayal," and "final negotiations" repeated again and again in distorted voices. Then the final message: "He will turn. The plea is coming. Secure the route." By the time agents stormed the safe house, they found nothing but empty maps, burned documents, and a single white envelope taped to the wall. Inside it was a printed statement. "You're late. He's already on the road." And that was when the call came in from Nevada Highway Patrol, an unmarked SUV speeding through the desert, refusing to pull over, with one name linked to the vehicle's burner registration: Ismael Zambada Garcia. The agents mobilized instantly. But what they didn't know was that Mayo wasn't running. He was arriving. After the surrender, Hart and her team questioned him for hours. He offered no resistance, no emotion, just a quiet, resigned acceptance. But what unsettled them most wasn't his cooperation. It was that he seemed to be waiting for something, as if surrendering was merely a move in a much deeper game. Late that night, as agents combed through the SUV, they opened a false compartment beneath the passenger seat. Inside, they found a leather-bound notebook with coordinates, names, and payment schedules. But on the last page, written in neat handwriting, was a phrase that made the entire room fall silent. The betrayal began within. Find the one wearing the badge. Everything froze. There was a traitor, not in the cartel, inside the investigation. And the next discovery would reveal just how close the betrayal really was. Because when they unlocked the second hidden compartment, what they found changed everything. The badge in the shadows. The second hidden compartment clicked open with a metallic snap, and Detective Claire Hart felt her pulse crawl into her throat. The agents surrounding her leaned in as she lifted a laminated ID card from the hollow space. It wasn't counterfeit. It wasn't an alias. It was real. A federal badge. One belonging to Special Agent David Rourke, a man Claire had worked beside for 7 years. A man she trusted. A man who had been briefed on every stage of the Zambada investigation. The room went silent. Outside, rain hissed across the concrete like static. Claire stared at the badge, her mind racing. Rourke had been missing for 2 days, supposedly on assignment in Tucson. The timing was too perfect. Too convenient. He wasn't undercover. He wasn't off-grid. He was running. But running from what? Or worse, running with who? She didn't have time to think about it. Across the holding wing, a sharp alarm blared. Agents sprinted toward El Mayo's cell. Claire followed, pushing through the cluster of uniforms. Inside the observation room, they found Zambada sitting calmly at the metal table, hands folded, eyes forward. On the cell floor lay a shredded scrap of paper he had somehow torn from the notebook before it was confiscated. A guard reached for it, but Claire stopped him. Let him explain. El Mayo lifted his gaze. His voice was low, gravelly, aged by decades of dust, smoke, and secrets. You're looking for the wrong enemy, he said. Rourke wasn't betraying your country. He was betraying us. Claire tried to steady her thoughts. Then why was your notebook hidden in his safe compartment? El Poder, Zambada muttered quietly. Power. It corrupts everyone. Even your own. His cryptic tone grated at her nerves. She knew men like him preferred riddles over truth, fear over clarity. But the badge had been real, and Rourke's disappearance was no coincidence. What did he take? Claire demanded. El Mayo's answer was immediate. Everything. 8 hours earlier, just outside Tucson, a dusty warehouse sat beneath a flickering floodlight, surrounded by silence. Inside, Agent Rourke paced the length of an old office, clutching a burner phone to his ear. Sweat beaded down his temple. His face was gaunt, restless. It's happening, he whispered into the phone. He's collapsing. The plea deal, it's real. A distorted voice crackled back through the static. Then you know what comes next. Rourke clenched his jaw. Yes. But I want out after this. I've done everything you asked. Out. The caller scoffed. No one walks away from this. Not even a federal agent. Rourke froze. Then the call dropped. He sank onto an old chair, head in his hands, realizing for the first time that he had crossed a line no one could return from. He wasn't serving justice. He wasn't undercover. He had become the very thing he once hunted, a ghost in both worlds. And now both sides wanted him gone. Back at the Las Vegas field office, Claire was analyzing the notebook, trying to understand the web of names and transactions. Most entries were coded, but one kept appearing repeatedly. Route Sierra Azul, deadline approaching. The same phrase found in the dead man's flash drive. The same phrase whispered in the intercepted safe house chatter. She traced the coordinates listed beside it, a remote highway pass on the Mexico-U.S. border, nearly inaccessible, used only by smugglers willing to risk extreme terrain. And beside that coordinate was an additional note. Rourke, final transfer. Claire stood so abruptly her chair slammed back. Rourke's going there. Tonight. The room snapped into action. Agents loaded into black SUVs. Tactical teams armed up. Helicopters prepared for night flight. Claire climbed into the lead vehicle, her jaw tight. She had worked cases with Rourke that nearly cost them their lives: shootouts, rescues, undercover stings. She had trusted him in darkness. And now she was hunting him. Hours later, the convoy neared Sierra Azul, headlights slicing through pitch-black mountain roads. The wind howled against the ridges, carrying sand and cold air down the narrow passes. At 2:14 a.m., a drone spotted a lone SUV parked beneath a rock ledge. Engine running, doors open. Claire approached cautiously, weapon drawn. The vehicle was empty. She scanned the ground. Fresh footprints. Fresh tire tracks. Someone had just been here. Then she saw something glinting on the passenger seat. A phone, smashed but still glowing faintly. Its screen displayed a message. Drop complete. Leave now. Claire's chest tightened. Whatever route Sierra Azul was, Rourke had already done it. The final transfer. The final betrayal. And he was still close. She followed the prints up a narrow ridge until the wind carried a faint metallic clang. She froze and raised her flashlight. Rourke was standing at the edge of the cliff, hands trembling, pointing a pistol downward at an aluminum case wedged between rocks. The moment the light hit him, he spun around. "Claire, don't," he gasped. "You need to step away from the ledge," she warned. "You don't understand." His voice cracked. "They weren't supposed to come after me. I thought flipping on El Mayo would buy me an exit. But they want all of us dead." "Who?" Claire demanded. Rourke shook his head, terrified. "A splinter group inside the cartel, the ones who orchestrated his surrender. They're using him as a distraction." "A distraction for what?" Rourke's eyes glistened. "For what's inside that case." Claire stepped closer. "Then tell me what it is." He swallowed hard. "Proof. Enough evidence to burn every faction, every deal, every leader, including the ones in Europe we never touched. That's why they're coming. That's why they want me erased." A low rumble echoed through the canyon. Engines. Multiple. Claire's heart dropped. They weren't alone. Rourke backed toward the cliff. "Claire, I'm sorry. I didn't know how deep it went." "Step away from the edge," she repeated, voice steady. But it was too late. A spotlight exploded across the ridge as unmarked trucks screeched into view. Rourke flinched, stumbled, his foot slipping on the gravel. Claire lunged to grab him, but Rourke fell backward, disappearing into the darkness as the aluminum case slid dangerously close to the cliffside. Above her, armed silhouettes spilled from the vehicles, their shadows stretching across the rocks, silent, precise, coordinated. Whoever they weren't there for arrests. They were there to finish the job. And the case containing the explosive evidence was seconds away from tumbling into the canyon. Claire drew her weapon, breath shaking. The night had erupted into a battlefield. And the real war behind El Mayo's plea was only beginning. The last deal. The gunfire began before Claire could blink. The first shot sparked off the boulder beside her, spraying stone chips across her face. She dove behind a jagged outcrop as the canyon erupted with echoing blasts. Muzzle flashes lit up the ridge in violent bursts, turning the silhouettes above into shifting phantoms. She crawled toward the cliff edge, eyes locked on the aluminum case, teetering dangerously. One wrong vibration and it would plunge into the abyss, taking every secret, every name, every route with it. Behind her, footsteps pounded against the gravel as the unknown strike team advanced. "Move in. Retrieve the case," someone shouted, their English tinted with a northern Mexican accent but sharpened by something else: discipline. These weren't street-level foot soldiers. These were trained professionals, perhaps ex-military. A splinter faction powerful enough to force El Mayo into surrender? Powerful enough to erase federal agents without hesitation? Claire steadied her breathing. Then she did the one thing they weren't expecting. She sprinted straight into the open. Bullets hissed past her as she dove onto the ground and wrapped both arms around the aluminum case. Gravel shredded her palms. A round clipped the rock near her hip. "She's got the package," a voice yelled. Claire rolled, using her momentum to pull the case toward her chest as she slid behind a stone ledge. Another volley of shots ricocheted inches from her head. Above the chaos, helicopter rotors thundered through the canyon. DEA backup. A blinding spotlight swept across the ridge, forcing the attackers to scatter. Tactical ropes dropped, and agents rappelled down with night vision visors and rifles at the ready. The battlefield shifted in seconds. Some of the Splinter Group gunmen fled down the switchback trail. Others tried to blend into the darkness, but DEA sharpshooters pinned them down, pushing them back as Claire signaled toward the cliff. "We have the evidence," she shouted into her radio. But Rourke. Her voice broke. She looked over the cliff edge, expecting only darkness. Instead, her flashlight revealed a miracle. Rourke hadn't fallen all the way. He was clinging to a narrow ledge 20 feet below, blood dripping down his arm, his face pale with shock. "Claire," he gasped. "I can't hold." "Don't move," she yelled, already signaling for a rescue line. Agents lowered a harness as Claire kept the attackers at bay. The Splinter Group tried one final push, firing from the ridge above, but the helicopter's spotlight locked onto them. Within minutes, they retreated into the night, leaving nothing but dust and the smell of gunpowder behind. Rourke was hauled up slowly, trembling, barely conscious. As they reached the top, he collapsed against the rocks, breathing hard. "I didn't want it to end like this," he whispered. "It doesn't have to," Claire replied, kneeling beside him. "Tell us everything." He stared at the canyon, at the place where he'd nearly died, then shifted his gaze toward the aluminum case. "That case, it's not just evidence," he said weakly. "It's leverage. The faction controlling the Sierra routes, they wanted to use El Mayo's plea deal as a smokescreen." "For what?" Claire asked. "To take everything," Rourke said. "Every route, every supplier, every contact in Europe. With El Mayo gone, no one could challenge them." Claire felt a chill. "So they forced him to plead guilty?" Rourke nodded. "They threatened his family, forced his circle to collapse from the inside. Even the body you found in Phoenix, that was no cartel hit. He was the first man who tried to warn us." Claire exhaled slowly. The pieces were falling into place, a quiet coup disguised as justice, masked behind the surrender of a kingpin the world thought untouchable. But there was still one final question. "Why did they want you?" she asked. Rourke looked away. "Because I helped them once. Years ago. I thought it was just intel exchange. I thought I was stopping violence. But they used me to expand their power. And when I realized it, I tried to back out." He met her eyes, guilt burning through him. "I deserve to be exposed. But not like this." Claire didn't answer. She stared at the case beside her, the case filled with names, maps, payment logs, international contacts. Enough to dismantle an empire or ignite a new war. She radioed headquarters. "We have evidence of a new organization behind the Sierra Azul routes. Prepare an international brief." The response came instantly. "Copy. Bring it in." 2 weeks later. Las Vegas Federal Detention Center. Mayo Zambada sat alone in a quiet interrogation room. The fluorescent light hummed above him as Claire entered with a file tucked under her arm. He looked older, smaller, a ghost of the man who had once commanded fear across borders. Claire placed the aluminum case on the table. "You were right," she said. "There was a betrayal, but not the one we expected." Mayo gave a tired smile. "Power always moves in silence. You can catch men like me. You can cage us. But the next ones, they are shadows you will not see." Claire didn't respond. She opened the case and pulled out the final page of the notebook, the one Zambada had torn. "My agents found this in the ridge," she said. "You tried to hide it." He didn't flinch. "Some truths are worse than lies." Claire slid the page across the table. "It's a list of bank accounts. Offshore. Coded. You knew about the Splinter faction long before your surrender." Mayo looked up slowly. "I didn't surrender to save myself," he said. "I surrendered to survive." Claire's breath caught. "Survive who?" His answer came quietly, almost reverently. "The ones who will replace me. The ones who already have." A sudden knock sounded on the door. Claire turned. An agent handed her a fresh report. She scanned it, and her stomach dropped. Another high-ranking trafficker in Europe had just vanished. No struggle. No witnesses. No trace. Just like the Phoenix victim. The same signature. The same message. A new power rising. Claire looked back at Mayo, who stared at her with hollow eyes. "It begins now," he whispered. She closed the file slowly, the weight of the truth settling across her shoulders. The world thought the Kingpin's guilty plea marked the end. But it had only opened the door to something far more dangerous, a new criminal shadow with no face, no leader, and no limits. And as Claire walked out of the interrogation room, she felt it, a storm gathering far beyond the courthouse walls. A storm no one was ready for. "If you think this case was dark," she murmured under her breath, "you're not ready for the next one." And somewhere in the mountains of Sierra Azul, under the cover of night, the unknown faction moved their first shipment along a new route, signaling the beginning of a new era. One built on silence, fear, and the ashes of the man the world thought had fallen. The story wasn't over. Not even close.